Hey there, it's Ryan, and welcome back to today's landscape tutorial. Here we're going to work on a vast landscape, really focus on the details, on the realism, and as per usual, if you're looking at it and you're thinking, oh no, that looks a little complicated, don't worry, the traceable is up over on Patreon, so if you'd like help with the drawing process, that will help ensure that you get the perspective, all the line work, all of that just right. And up there you can also now get these videos ad-free. All of the videos moving forward, all of these lessons, you can watch without ads, and you can also watch them a little bit earlier. So if you're interested, check it out up over on Patreon. You can also find my ebooks and bonus lessons, all of that good stuff up there. So check it out if you're interested, but we are going to jump into this, have a lot of fun, and with that, let's get to it. So we're going to start here today with a 1-inch flat-headed brush, and I will dip the bottom third of it into a little bit of water, then proceed to wipe off the excess. This will just help us blend our pigments better. Then I'll grab an abundance of titanium white, small hint of Mars black, small hint of ultramarine blue. We'll mix that up, and we'll start applying this to some of the areas in the sky which will have an abundance of clouds. And you're not going to see a big difference between this and the actual canvas. That's okay though. It'll all come together once we start incorporating the blues in the sky. So from here we grab our ultramarine blue, but the same amount of our titanium white, yet again, hint of Mars black, just so we can desaturate our blue just a little bit. And we'll mix up a good amount of this. We have a lot of sky to cover, so we need a proper amount of paint. And once we have a pigment that we're fairly happy with, we're going to take this and we're just going to start working it in to those open spots. Now, I'm going to be a little bit messy with this initially. Not too worried about getting it just right, because we're going to blend it into all the surrounding clouds. So, right now it's just about getting that pigment on the canvas while both are still wet. And then, with a bit of a soft stroke, we'll work one into the other. The less pressure you have with your brush, the more of a loose blend you'll be able to achieve. I'm going to work around all of these fairly quickly initially. If you find that one area is starting to dry and therefore the blend isn't happening as easily as you'd like it to, we can always go back to the other pigment and interject that. So here we're going to go back in with that almost white pigment that we initially had for the clouds. And as you can see, now we're blending wet into wet. We don't have to worry about the dry time because they're both extremely in that beginning stage, where the pigment is so malleable, works great with everything beside it. And this is going to give us a lot of soft looking clouds. Nothing too dramatic. They look nice and wispy. As the blue starts to dry, we can put more of that onto our canvas, and we can kind of just work back and forth until we end up with something that we like. Doesn't have to be just like mine. Doesn't have to be perfect, because this is a subject that just has so much potential variation that it's more about finding the look that you like. And that's great. We get to interject parts of ourselves into the painting, right? Now take a bit of a step back. I'm going to solidify a couple of the clouds towards the bottom here, and once you have all of those soft movements, you can incorporate some that are a little bit sharper create different kinds of clouds, different layers. So here I just have a couple little horizontal movements, which I really like. There we go. Making it so no area is too white or too blue. Just through all of these applications. And don't worry, if you go over the trees, we can always redraw them, and the second time you put them in, it's likely going to be better than the first, just because we learn a lot through that process, right? And every time we apply it, we learn a little bit more, we get a little bit better. Also, if you would like help, that traceable is up over on Patreon, along with the early access and ad-free version of lessons just like this. That said, I think we're just about there with what I'm looking for. Might leave a couple brush strokes in here just so it remains a bit painterly, but if you want it to look hyper-realistic, we just go for all of those soft blends. That's, again, up to you, your preference, and what you want your painting to look like. So, getting closer here, what I want you to notice is that we do have a couple larger areas that are white, but then we have all of these smaller little transitional pieces, and it's the combination of those two that really bring this together. You don't want just small little wispy bits, you don't want just the larger ones, you want to put them together, and I think that typically renders the best looking space. Also, you can see a little bit of canvas grit on here. Again, I like that because it does add a little bit of a painterly feel, but if you don't, just do another layer or two and you should be void of it. Also, as an aside, you can see I have a bit of titanium white left here. We could use that to start our next mix, start applying it to the canvas, do all of that. However, mid-application we would need more, we would need to mix more, and that means everything we just applied would start to dry. So rather than have that issue later on, I'm going to open up more white. We're going to apply that to the palette now, and it's just going to make the process a lot easier. So the larger tip here is to essentially get what you need before you need it and apply that to the palette rather than when you need it. It'll just make blending a whole lot easier. Alright, so now we're back at our palette, and we're going to start working on the mountains in the background. These are going to have a lot of blue in them because of the reflective light, because it's in the distance, and what we actually want is something a bit darker than what we have in our sky. So we're still leaning on our blues, our titanium white and our Mars black. You can see I'm mixing on top of or beside what we used for the sky, so I can use that as a point of reference. And we're just looking for something a bit darker, a bit more gray. I think this will actually be a great starting point. So we'll start blocking this in towards the top. Yet again, I am going over a lot of our drawn trees. That's okay. We want to make sure that we have a nice thick application here, so don't spread the pigment too thin. If you need more, just go back to your palette and grab it. And once we have that applied, we're going to make a slightly darker version, a little bit more Mars black, and we're going to work that into the foreground of the set of mountains. It's still in the background, but it's closer to us than the ones we were just working on. I am going to go over a lot of that drawing, maybe keep hints of it just so I have an idea of where to start again. And as I move towards the left-hand side here, we are going to start to get a blend. Now I don't want to blend towards the top because I want this to be a mountain range, which is in front of this one. However, they are going to transition into each other right down here. So at this point, we do let that happen. We get that soft blend, and we move from one value into the next. Now we'll take a step back and we'll just return this to that brighter pigment that we had in the background there. Then we'll switch on over to our fan brush, And this is great because you can make a myriad of very small markings quite quickly. We'll take just a hint of it. We don't want a lot of pigment because the more we grab, the more it condenses our bristles. And then we'll just do little protrusions in the background, which will imply trees, clusters of them, depending upon how you want to apply this. If you go over it a couple of times, you'll start to amalgamate strokes. They'll get larger, it'll look like clusters. If you just do one little marking, it'll look like a wide collection of trees. We'll get you a bit closer for the details though. So as you can see, we've already done a lot just through those few markings. I'm not using the entirety of the brush, I'm just using about a third of it, maybe not even that. But we can combine a lot of the little ones by going over it multiple times, or we can leave it to be a bit more eclectic. I'm also now going to make this mix slightly darker yet again. So Mars Black, so that it resembles that of what we have in the foreground of this set of mountains. We'll grab that same brush and we can do that same thing. Trying not to angle my brush, because if I do, I might also angle the trajectory of the trees, and we don't want that. We can also switch on over to a liner brush and use this to create even bigger trees, right? It's such a small brush, it makes tiny impressions, but they are still larger than that of what we are creating when we are using the fan brush. And I like to use a combination of these two brushes as we start to get a little bit closer, because the trees will look bigger because of perspective, and this is an easy way of having a lot of control as you do so. So I'm not going to do it to all of the trees, but I'll just pick a couple areas, accentuate them, make the peaks a little bit higher here and there, also create little valleys. We want some level of diversity amongst these. There we go. Now from there we're going to break out the burnt sienna, which is a great warm earthy hue, wonderful for our rocks in the distance. And then, as you can see, I've just drawn on with a little bit of Conte the drawing which we had there before. Again, you can just use the traceable, but now I'm going to mix up a light but desaturated earthy burnt sienna hue for us to work with as a base layer in our mountains. And it can be a little disjointed with its colors. We can have some areas that are a little bit warmer, some that are a little bit darker. We're looking for a unique set of values and hues for our rocks. And for the actual application, I'm going to switch on over to a smaller flat-headed brush, because it'll have a good surface area, but it'll also be great for the details. And with that, we'll grab a little bit here, and then we'll start interjecting these areas of sand and rock and pathway, which work right along our mountain. And I'm not too worried about my actual drawing. We can be a bit playful with it, and you notice that I am through here. But essentially we want to create little paths through here. It's a bit softer, and then harder rock up here where we have a bit more of a slant. And that means with this it's a bit more blended, but as we come up to this top area, my markings are going to be very horizontal. They'll be climbing. We'll have openings in between a lot of them, so you can still see that blue. And this is where it matters that our brush is very sharp. This is where we get those more unique patterns and details. And I'm trying to create some areas that are a bit larger, some that are a bit sharper. Sharper typically go towards the top, and then we amalgamate as we get towards the bottom, as it starts to flatten out a little bit. And we can have various degrees of this highlight. We're going to build a lot of it over time, but this is a good base. I'm making it a bit more saturated than it is in the reference, but intentionally so. I just want it to pop to a greater degree. And we're going to add trees in front around a fair amount of this as well. So don't worry about the edges too much. We will be doing quite a bit of refining. My brush is quite damp, so I'm getting all of these sharp intentional markings, but it also means I have to do a bit more layering. And just a hint of it in the background too. Now it'll feel cohesive. Now we'll take a step back and we'll make a brighter variant of that which we had, though I'm going to make it a bit more gray. I want to lose that saturation to a point because we'll see it through this, because acrylics are semi-transparent. So from there, back to the smaller flat-headed brush, pick up some of this pigment, and this is something I'm not going to apply over all of our past applications, but if we essentially have an area that protrudes, I'm going to apply it to the left-hand side of that protrusion, just like this, just like this, just like this. And I'm doing that because in our piece, the light is going this way. So the left-hand side of all of our subjects is going to receive a bit more, where the right-hand side is going to be a bit darker. It's going to be where the shadows are. The land itself can cast a shadow on itself, and that's what we're taking into account when we are mindful of these applications. So here, working down, and we're starting to get something that looks a little bit more like land, which is great. We'll build up our layers. Also use the corner of the brush for little tapping motions, just to build detail and texture. We don't have to always be making a brush stroke. Sometimes we can go in with a brush tap, and that'll give us a different but very valuable effect. I'm going to be careful not to do too much over here, so I'm just applying it when I've almost run out of pigment and my brush is very watery, so it's quite transparent in the background. Now yet again, we go back. I'm jumping around a lot because I want to give different areas periods of time to dry before I do a lot with them. Because if we just keep applying it while it's wet, sometimes we can rip off previous pigment in a way that we don't want to, or we just move it around. We don't really build on it. We don't achieve those greater highlights which we're capable of if we just take a little breather from that spot. So you can see I'm slowly building it up. Going to take another step back, just make sure that it's coming together in the way that we want it to. It's important. Don't always want to paint from just a foot away, because paintings aren't typically seen from a foot away. They're seen 5, 6, 7, 8, typically a room away, right? Here I'm just doing a soft wash over a lot of this to soften the blue shadows that we have, but they still remain. So from, again, quite a distance, I think that's looking great. It doesn't have too much detail. We could make it a little bit brighter, and we're going to, but I also just thought I'd point out, I do keep my reference photo just on my phone, right to the side. That way we can zoom in, zoom out, and just be very cognizant of that which we're doing. Now, as promised, yet again, we are just brightening our mixture. Don't want it to be too saturated. Don't want it to be too dark. So this time, titanium white is our predominant choice of pigment, with hints of the other two. And the actual application, we can go with a flat-headed brush or we can go with the liner brush. I think I'll probably do a bit of both, but this is where ideally things start to feel a little bit complete, at least in terms of the ground and the rock, because it'll still look like a basic foundation until we have our trees in place. But this gets us there. A necessary stepping stone. If you have a little bit of canvas showing through, that's not a bad thing. If you have a bit of grit, a bit of tooth, because we are painting rock, and while it is distant, you'll still be able to get a hint of that. Now let's switch on over to the liner brush. Yeah, that's exactly what we needed. Great for solidifying ideas. All of those protrusions which are catching light, looking so much better now. I'm going to do squared areas. Just like so. Do a hint more. Then we can take another step back, make sure we like it. And build up those areas that we really believe in, ones that are catching the most light. Lots of taps as well. All of the smaller taps create additional scaling because it's the contrast of large markings and small ones which make the large ones appear as if the subject is grand. There we go. From here, I'm going to add a little bit of green to our palette, and this is a great green for warmer hues, warmer days. If you want something a little bit more neutral, a sap green is great, but here we'll grab that. We're going to grab some Mars Black, titanium white. We want to make it a bit more gray, also a bit more thick. Though this is in the distance, it's not going to have a lot of saturation. We build our saturation as we get closer to us. So right now we're just interjecting that Mars Black, that titanium white. We're doing so in abundance. I'm also going to add in a bit of our Ultramarine blue because we will still have that blue reflective light in the background. So, not going with the first color we mix, really finding what we want, and once we have it, we are, you guessed it, going to switch our brushes to a smaller flathead, which I'll make sure is nice and damp. We'll grab this pigment, and then we'll start to create openings that are adopting sunlight. Now these are going to work in the same direction as a lot of our rocks, right? It's all moving down in this similar steep movement. And because we're not painting all of our grass, because these are just little openings, we're doing so in a way that's a bit sparse for the most part. We can have it work its way into these rocky areas here and there. just like so. And then we can double down by making a slightly brighter, slightly more saturated version, just like so. Again, green gold, so easy to get that warm sunlight hue. We'll just work that on top in the areas that will receive the most. I might not apply it as much towards the edges here because the edges will have shadows by trees. There we go. And I'm doing little blends towards the edges, just soft brush strokes here and there. Nothing too dramatic. And just do some taps up these, make it cohesive. Easy. Now that was our highlight, so it's time to make a darker version for our trees, which are all going to be sticking up, much like we have in the background there, but a little bit bigger. I want these to have some extra blue in them, and we're going to build up their highlight over time, so this first mixture is going to be a bit darker. Now for the actual application, we can do so with the fan brush, or we can do so with the liner brush. It's up to you, but I think I'm going to start personally with the fan brush. And you know what? I think we already have a great pigment here. So, going to overlap the green that we just applied. Make sure that the trees are doing a good job of taking up space, and we can be fairly dense with this. We don't have to have a lot of blue showing through. We can work it into the green as well. It doesn't just have to be around, because realistically these are grassy spots which will also occasionally have trees growing on them. That said, let's get you a bit closer. So from here, again, we work on top, we work behind. I do multiple strokes and applications. If you want your trees to get a little bit bigger as you move into the foreground, and I do, I make my brush slightly damp, and as you can see, it forks the brush, at least if you are using my brush set. Otherwise, you can use a soft bristled fan brush instead of a hard bristled fan brush. But with this one, the bristles are very sharp, defined, and individual when it's dry, and they condense and fork into larger ones when you make it wet. So it's pretty versatile. And again, I do want my trees to be larger in the foreground, because as we get closer to us, we will see more of the actual trees. We'll work these into the top. Work a couple just throughout the rocky terrain. And we have more green than blue as we get closer to us. There we go. Nice and easy. Nice and quick. Now, to make a slightly more blue variant, just interject extra ultramarine blue. Maybe make it slightly more gray. We're eliminating the green is essentially what we're doing. We still have a hint of it, but it's not prominent. Then we're back to our fan brush, and what I'm going to do is, it's wet, but I don't want all of the larger markings because now we're moving into the distance. So I'm going to dry it on a piece of paper towel, and then I'm going to shuffle the bristles back and forth to the point where they expand again. And as you can see, instead of having 5 or 6 markings, now we have dozens. We'll grab some pigment, both sides. We'll just start working this into the distance. Let it dissipate. We'll create clusters by just using about 1/3 of the brush in certain areas, because we don't want a series of lines. Not really. And then I just let that paint run out as I work my way up this back mountain. So we have hints of trees, we have hints of clusters of trees, but we don't have too many. And again, if you're looking to work with the exact same brushes that I am, there's a link in the description where you can pick up this brush set. But there we go. Very happy with this. Okay, so we're taking some steps back, and I think it passes the distance test quite well, though now I can tell that I want to increase the highlights of my rocks by just a little bit. So here we're going in with a predominantly titanium white, but there's a bit of our burnt umber, has a bit of our Mars black. It is more titanium white heavy though than any of our other mixtures for this rock. And this is where we can just re-interject a little bit of highlight and show that that light is coming down and really having a somewhat dramatic effect on our rocks. It'll make this pop to a much greater degree. Not doing this to all of it, just the areas that are on the top and receiving the most light. We can also make a slightly brighter green. You can see there's so much room for buildup of our green. We're going to save that for later in the foreground. We can use something that's a little bit brighter. Just work that into some of these openings. Avoiding our tiny trees, though we can repaint them should we need to. And this is one of those things where if you brighten the rocks, you need to brighten the grass too. Because there's grass that's going to be receiving the same amount of light as the rocks we just ordained in light. There we go. Almost there. Love that. Didn't take much time, but I think it added a lot. Now, I am noticing that my hands are getting a little bit shaky because it's been a while since I've had something to eat. So I'm going to cut up an apple, have some water, make sure that we are staying healthy, and that should give us a little bit more control. So just a friendly reminder to drink some water and make sure that you are staying healthy through the process, right? It's so easy to just kind of get lost in the painting, but we do need to take care of ourselves. All right, so we've had some food, we're feeling better. And now we're going to move even more forward into this corner of the painting. It's more of this, but it's kind of this valley that's inset right through there. We're going to begin by rendering a less blue version of what we used for our base there. We still have that pigment on our palette. It's dry, so we don't have to worry about mixing with it, but we can use it as a reference. And we're going to make this a little bit darker, a little bit less saturated. So started with the initial mix, found that pigment, and then started to interject slightly more Mars black and titanium white. And I know the titanium white brightens it, which seems counterintuitive, but the Mars black is darkening it, and the titanium white is desaturating it, which is the real goal through there. So I'm going to test this right up here because it's beside our previous darker pigments, and that's important. I do like it, so we'll have some follow through with this. Now here we get into a point where it's mostly trees. We can see through them just a little bit though. I'm handling the edges for the most part first. And yes, there is, or there was, a tree right there. We are going to cover that up for the time being. Resketch it in when we need to. This is a base layer, make sure it's nice and thick. And once we have this applied, maybe a second layer, we'll go in and start building up some highlights, some details. There we go. Now from here, we'll take that step back, and so far, big fan. I think we're just going to work on the sunny areas of grass first, because we want to layer trees over top of it, as well as shadows. So we'll begin just by rendering that. We're not going to interject much of our French ultramarine blue into this. And we do start with just a base layer hue. We can get brighter from here. I am still going to apply it with the flat-headed brush, the smaller flat-headed brush. Going to work my strokes predominantly in the direction that the grass is going to be working up. And typically, I wet my brush beforehand, but this time I'm not because I'm okay with a bit of a gritty look. I think that at this distance, grass looks great with a little bit of grit. If we add the water, then we'll get something much sharper. The paint will work its way into the tooth of the canvas with greater ease, which isn't typically a bad thing and something I actually often opt for. But here I think it looks just a little bit better rough. There we go. Now let's make it slightly brighter. Titanium white, sap green, Mars black. You can see, still so much room to make it vibrant, in the sun, warm, but we're not there yet. We're getting there, but we're not there yet. This is slightly warmer, this time void of the ultramarine blue. Getting there. Really just working in the center at this point, still letting the edges be a bit more vague, a bit softer. There we go. See, we're moving in small steps to get the pigments we really want. This looks like it's just about as bright as what we have in the background. So we built up to our previous heightened mixture. Just like so. We'll throw this on, build it up. And I think just one more and we'll be there. So back to the palette, titanium white, sap green, green gold, or sap green, neither of which is incorrect. I think it comes down to preference here. Also maybe just what you have. I do happen to be out of sap green, So this is just a very happy coincidence that today I wanted to work more with green gold. But I love that. That's exactly what we were looking for. And now the edges are darker, so we have a good build-up. We have a little bit of depth in there. I'm not going over everything. In here you can start to see brush strokes. It's a bit painterly. And the more we build, the more of the natural color that we have on our palette we get. Where initially it's a combination of what we have underneath and what we have on the palette, because acrylics are just innately so thin. There we go. Now we'll take a step back. We'll grab some of our burnt sienna, titanium white, hint of our Mars black, and as you can see I'm using my liner brush. But with this, we're going to make something quite bright, and we're going to use it to create little pathways within our grass here. Now these are going to get smaller as we move into the distance, so you're going to press less hard with your brush as you move farther and farther away. And you can go over the layers in the foreground a couple of times to build them up to be a bit more stark. Now I have you at a bit of a distance because I also think this is just one of those portions of the painting that's best done from a distance, because you want to look at it as a whole and not get too caught up in the details. It's more about the larger movements. We have different straying paths, keeping it interesting. And the paths aren't perfect. We have little areas that protrude and branch off. We can also do just tiny little spots that have more dirt and sand than they do grass. We can use our fingers to soften things. But once that's applied, we're going to switch on over to our flat-headed brush, start interjecting some trees. So now we're back to grabbing from the darker hue that we used for the base, and as you can see, I'm going to work this up and over the greenery on the bottom. Not so much the top. Not yet anyway. We can also put some trees in the greenery, make it a bit more interesting. We want our trees to be larger when we're closer to us, smaller as we get into the distance. It's a good general rule. And then as we are in that background towards the tops, I'll just do a couple sparse taps for trees that are a bit more inwards, but we essentially want this darker, more horizontal, firm tree line in the background. You can see it really cleans up the area quickly. I'm kind of waiting for this to dry a little bit more because portions of the pathway are still wet for me. And you do want that to be dry. Again, try to make these nice and unique, a bit bigger. It's always interesting when you can kind of block an area off a little bit and create subsections. Go over the trees a couple of times where they're thin. And you might even want to do a little bit of this pattern outwards just in case your pigment changed between the first mix and the second as it started to dry, as you had to remake it. This way we just interject this pattern of trees essentially. It's unintentional, it's not necessary. but it can actually look quite good. And it's just a product of, again, maybe a slightly different mix as you progress. There we go. Now we'll work on a detail a lot of people will forget, but these trees, because we have a hard light, are going to cast shadows. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the green, or because mine is dry, I'm going to remix the green that we used for the grass, the highlight of it. We need a good amount. Can make it a little bit darker. But then I'm going to grab the ultramarine blue that we used here, going to remix that, and then, you guessed it, we're going to put them together. And this is going to give us a nice pigment for the shadows, which we'll apply with our liner brush. So make this nice and damp, and then every time we have a tree, I'm just going to do a little stroke in the direction that the shadow would be cast, which is down towards the center of the painting. It's angular. We have a lot of trees here, so there's a lot of shadow there. I think this could honestly be a little bit darker for me. Yeah, it should be. And again, this is a friendly reminder, we don't just go with the first pigment we mix, we keep working until we get the right one. I think you could also just use a hint more blue. Here we are. Back to the liner. We don't want too much water here, but we want enough. This is so much better. Perfect. I'm going to go over portions of our path, but we can just repaint that in later with a darker pigment to reflect that the path too has shadows on it. This feels like such a little detail, but it does have a big impact. There we go. And it'll really take up a lot of space towards the tops of the tree lines, especially those inset areas in between the trees. And I'll go back and do this a couple of times just to make sure that we have nice thick applications. There we go. You can also do little taps. Might look like there are tiny rocks, different visual inconsistencies in the grass, which is interesting. So, not big ones, just using even the corner of the liner brush. Then we'll go to our burnt sienna, Mars black, titanium white, mix up that darker path color, and work that back in. Just like that. So, here, the middle ground, that's our next step. We're going in with a desaturated but light green. Something that's less light than what we have there in the openings, but still fairly so. And here you can see it's a little bit different from the grass. And I'm going to purposefully keep that on the palette so that we can use it as an example, but we can't have anything too saturated just yet because we're saving those pigments for the foreground. So in the meantime, we'll build up a beautiful muted gray to try. I think I like this a lot. I think this is actually great. And for the background, I want to begin with our fan brush. I'm going to shift through it so that we get the sharper bristles, like that. Grab it on both sides, and this was the technique that we used for the background. Admittedly, I don't know if this is a little bit too small for where we are, but I think if we press slightly harder with our brush, as you can see I'm doing, we can get larger markings, and we are getting larger markings than in the background. So this is perfect, actually. I'm going to skip a couple of areas. I'm going to start combining areas. So we're aiming to not get just pure lines. But I think I'm only going to do this until maybe the midsection. I can press even harder. You know what, this might be able to carry us farther than I thought. It's difficult to maneuver around these smaller trees, so for that, I think we switch to the liner brush. And I'll get you a bit closer. So for here, we'll grab that pigment and we'll go individually on the left-hand side of the protruding trees. So we're adding some dimension, an intentional dimension to these guys. The marking is actually a pretty close, a pretty similar size to what we had with a fan brush when we applied a lot of pressure, which is great. It means we can create a nice transition between these two, and that's actually what I'm doing now. I'm committing to it. We put in a lot of time with a fan brush, or at least we covered a lot of surface area with the fan brush. It didn't take long at all. That's the beauty of the fan brush, right? It just expedites our process dramatically. But here, I'm going to try to not get lazy, because when we get lazy with this approach, we can kind of add bends and curves to our applications that shouldn't be there. We make the tops less sharp than they should be. So here, I think I'll just be intentional around the left-hand side of our trees initially. And I might even, trees are getting pretty big, I might change back to the fan brush but use it in a different way. I think I will. We'll just create a transition. So my markings are getting larger as we move downwards, as the trees will get larger, but I'll still create some big connective areas and tissue to show that the trees grow in clusters. Yeah, that worked well. Switching back to the fan brush, I'm going to use just about a fifth of it. And instead of working diagonally or horizontally, I'm going to try to present the edges of trees with some extra detail. I'm going to start by attempting to go over the highlighted edges that we already have established with a liner brush. It's difficult to apply intentional detail with this, but if we're cognizant, if we're making a real effort, I think it's doable to a degree. This is one of the exploratory processes I was talking about. So far, so good. The question is, how will it work as we expand downwards? Are we going to lose shape? Is it going to become too definitive, not definitive enough? Trying to be a bit randomized. Okay. You know what? I think it's actually working. I think we got lucky. Though this isn't all we're going to do for this step. We can definitely expand, make it better. It's a great base though. Quick to achieve. I'm very happy. And we're going to make sure that some of them stray down all the way into the negative space of the canvas, very intentionally so, because the trees don't just end close to it. They're overlapped by what we have here. Okay. We'll just do a little bit up here, create that connective tissue, switch back over to the liner brush, add some definitive sharp tops to these trees. We can add additional intentional form should we want to, through minute taps. Again, this worked out so much better than I expected. Goes to show that the practice we put in other paintings really does transfer. Good. Okay, I like that a lot. I like that a lot. So now I'm happy to see and announce we are passing the distance test. Looks good from and afar. And we can go slightly brighter. Not by a lot. I think we could just use a minor highlight. This is more saturated, but I do want it to be. We're going to clean our fan brush because it's starting to dry, just dipping it in some water. And now I'm going to fan it out, get some of that moisture off. Again, there are going to be times where you want it to be a bit more together and times where you want it to be more apart. That's the beauty of this brush. It's not just a stiff bristled fan brush or a soft bristled fan brush. It can act as both. We need to go brighter. More titanium white. Spreading it widely in my area because I don't want large amounts of paint to be picked up by the fan brush. I want it to be very consistent. And that's where this will excel. And now I'm going to the left-hand sides of these trees and applying these highlights. Occasionally I'm also just creating new trees. Part of it's intentional, part of it's not. Part of it's just because we're working with a big brush in a small area. And that's the truth of it. We can interject a little bit of that extra highlight farther back. Switch on over. I know my hand's probably in the way through portions of this. I do apologize. These are just areas that are tiny to the point where I need that extra control, and that means hand placement can't always be ideal. But I think we're back to a good spot. It's okay if the trees look a little ambiguous. You can't tell where they start or end sometimes, because that is how it works in nature, especially at a distance. I think that's just about it. Very close. You know, I was going to have very large trees take up this area covering the majority of it, and I do think in general it's a great practice to be okay with covering up pre-completed portions of your painting that you like for the greater good of the painting, but I don't know that I actually really need to for the greater good of the painting. I might eliminate the primary tree that's going to go here, and therefore I need to fill in this space and this space a little bit. So there's this little triangle that I've left empty. I think I'm going to just continue this over here, maybe that down a little bit, we'll see, and then I'll build the trees on top how we see fit. So this is just to note, you might want to continue it a little bit farther to the point where you do have this triangle. We'll see. It's almost time for bed. As an update, I pulled the trigger. We now have a darker backdrop in all of that negative space, and I'm going in and I'm just painting more trees. They're all fairly distant, so it's the relatively easy application that we had earlier with these distant trees. However, I can tell that my mixture just a bit more titanium white in it. So we'll interject that, we'll make it nice and flat. We'll go back to our fan brush. Perfect. We got there. Press a little bit harder as we get closer to us. And you know, going back and having to do these additions is actually great, because now it reaffirms the ideas that we previously had and those techniques in our heads. Having to do it twice is definitely valuable for future painting lessons and paintings in general. Then I'll switch on over to the liner brush. Get some of the more unique trees. Grab a slightly brighter mix. Continue the sunlight down a little bit. And I probably am going to cover the majority of this with branches and trees later on, but in the very least now we have the option, and that's nice. So there we go, nice and simple. We have a beautiful valley now. Okay, so from here I think I'm actually going to make an alteration to our initial drawing. I had trees placed throughout here, but as we developed the background I realized that I'm actually very happy with the amount of depth we have through it, and if we cover a lot of it, we will lose that impression. I think we need to cover some of it, but not all. So with that, I'm going to grab some of our nice green gold right here. We'll grab some Mars Black. We're going to mix the darkest green that we've done thus far. We still need some titanium white. We want a little bit of our ultramarine blue, just a hint. We're mixing up a good amount of this here initially, just like so. Now with it, I'm going to use the larger flat-headed brush to just sketch on some trees which are going to be climbing the hill that we are currently looking at. So we don't see the base of the tree, we only really see the tops of them. We want them to be different heights. Here we have one where you can still see the top of it. I think that's just a little bit too high. We can expand this to make it higher later if we want to, but I think for now I'm going to have mine end right there. And then we'll progressively have them get smaller as you move into the background, as you move farther down the hill. So there's my new kind of trajectory of them. I think we could go a little bit darker, to be honest. Double down on the markings we've already made. We want the tops to be nice and sharp. There we go. Almost there. Just like that. Now, we're going to make sure we have a good amount of this pigment mixed up on our palette. And I think we'll switch our brush. Here, we're back to the liner, grabbing that same pigment and very simply, we're going to start creating protrusions on both sides of our tree. I'm doing so with a myriad of little tap and drags. Typically it goes down and then it warps a bit. And the idea here is that we slowly get more full with our applications, so we can press harder with our brush. We can make more markings that are close together, though we want to make sure that both sides continue to look unique. What that means is that if we apply it on the left-hand side of the tree with a certain movement and progression, we don't do that on the other side. We want both sides to be different. We also imagine that there are branches moving forward towards us and back, so we even paint those in as if they're working this way. Now this is just a base layer. We are going to make it three-dimensional in further steps, but for now we're simply creating a nice silhouetted base like so. Now the tree beside it is going to get the same treatment. And I know that they're quite close together. In fact, they're going to overlap. Don't worry about overlapping them. Don't worry about losing detail in one or the other. If it looks like they're overlapping and almost combining to a point, it'll look great. It'll give us some extra depth, even in the foreground. And this is the foreground. We're finally there. So details matter. Depth still exists here. And we'll make sure that we have a lot of it. Yet again, moving over. Making sure that both sides are progressively different. Going in with this fairly sporadic tap. You can see that my fingers are pretty close to the brush, which means that I have the ability to paint like I'm using a pencil, so finer markings are easier to render. However, you might want to hold your brush farther back, as this will render a bit more of a randomized application, which you might like here, if you feel like you're getting markings that are just a bit too similar. You can even put little trees in between. I like that. Let's take a step back though and just make sure that we have the depth and the scale that we want. You know, I think this is what we're looking for. As you can see, our trees are all at different heights. Even if we move over to this one, it's a little bit lower than that, it's higher than that. So as long as we continue to take our time to progressively expand our branches in unique ways, then this is going to turn out great. We're leaving openings between some of our branches, and the more you do this, the easier it'll get. You'll find it becomes quite intuitive. Happens without even thinking, really. You just can sense the spatial variance, which is great. And if you painted trees like this before, it should be pretty intuitive. But we've got a good line of them, so if you haven't, you'll learn the subject well in this lesson here, this exercise. You know, we call it an exercise sometimes, and it's really what it is. You know, you go and you exercise, you work out, you put in reps, and slowly and surely you make progress, you learn what you're doing, the body changes. Painting's the same way. Slowly but surely comes together. We render what we want. We just put in our reps. Okay. Now, once we have this applied in the way that we want, and I'm very close to having exactly what we want, we are going to start working with our highlights, because these trees too will be adopting light. There we go. And for that, we want it to be fully dry. So I'm going to give this probably 2 minutes, maybe 3, and then we'll jump back in with a new mix. So I like it from an afar, and at this point we are going to work on the highlights. The pigment is fully dry, and we are going to go in with our green gold, titanium white, a little bit of Mars black, and the goal here is to render the most saturated bright green we've made yet. Now here we have all of our previous greens, so we have a good reference point for how saturated and green we can move to. I don't want to make it substantially brighter or more green. I just want a step in that direction. So we're going to try to keep some of that previously bright pigment to the right of our, or to the left of our mix, as we progressively play with this. And you can see I'm adding little bits each time until we get what we actually want. And I think that right here is it. Now, I'm going to be applying it with the liner brush, same brush we were just using. And I'm going to apply this initially to the tops of our protrusions, but predominantly on the right-hand side, or rather on the left-hand side. The camera inverts the visual, so it can be a little confusing sometimes to articulate that, but here you can see we're even highlighting the areas that presumably protrude in the middle, so I'm not just going over the edges, I'm also working my way inward. We want a lot of fine details. And if you start to feel like you're losing the tree, that silhouette in the background a little bit, that's okay too. It doesn't need to be hyper prominent. It just needs to be a little bit brighter, a little bit more saturated, and have a bit more contrast than that which we've previously instilled in the distance. And much like all of the other techniques, this is one where very quickly becomes second nature. Just this easy cathartic application method. Here, some of our trees with overlapping branches, that's important. And my mix is pretty watery right now. That's giving us a sharp bristle. end of our brush. However, it does mean that as it dries, it's going to be a little bit darker because we're not going in with opaque pigment. More of that darker pigment will show through. Right now it looks brighter because A, acrylics dry a little bit darker, but B, because it's wet and reflective, and that reflection is going to make it seem brighter than it is. So we're just being aware of that. And an easy fix is to just go in and do a second layer, should you need it. But I'd rather go in and do that second layer and get these sharp markings than not be able to get these sharp markings and do it once with a less intentional, less detailed application. This is how we get some nice realism. It's also worth noting that when we grab our pigment and we start applying it at the top, we have the most opaque, most noticeable applications because we have the most pigment on our brush. And as you progressively work down our branches, we lose that, right? So as we get farther down, things get more transparent. That means as they dry, those bottom applications will be darker, and that's actually great because it means the bottom of the tree, the area that will naturally get shadow from the top of the tree, will be a bit darker. So it creates this beautiful, slow transition of changing values. It's natural. That adds to the depth, realism of the piece. So don't fight that. Allow the top to be brighter, more opaque. Allow the bottom to be a bit more watery, semi-transparent. Alright, so did a couple extra highlights there, just built that up. And now we're going to move over to the right hand side by mixing our darkest green yet. We're going to use our green gold. We're still going to use a little bit of that titanium white, a little bit of that ultramarine blue, just to keep it cohesive in the shadows. But we want something nice and dark, just like so. And now we're going to start to draw in the base of our trees, the trunks, like so. We have this one kind of protruding like that. And you can see my applications are a little bit toothy. They're not as sharp as I'd like, so I'm just going to grab some extra water. That should fix it. It is fixing it. Very good. Then we'll continue. And I typically like to work on the edges first. And then once I essentially lose the ability to render sharp markings, then I'll work into the larger, more prominent areas which require a bit more of a full spread application. Very much akin to what you're currently looking at. But this area right here is also all going to be a bit darker. As you move towards the right hand side, we can be a bit more blue heavy, a little bit more Mars black. We still have that green. But we're moving farther and farther into an area of shadow. There we go. We'll just work that down. We'll do a couple of layers just to make sure that we have a nice thick application. Might expand this to be a bit thicker. And I try to make lots of little marks rather than one elongated one. That way we have some natural movements within our trees. Just feels a little bit better. There we go. And again, we'll work out into our negative space. Now, we can have some real fun. You know what? Let's mix a bit more of that Now it's go a bit more green gold heavy. Still quite dark, that's what we want, but we'll work that out. And I can still see my drawings slightly. So I'm going to start drawing our branches. Again, if you lost them, you can use a traceable. Go back to the start of the video. But I'm going in with a wide assortment of these taps with the larger flat-headed brush, creating these protrusions very quickly, rendering a wide assortment of protruding branches. I like these a lot. There we go. Cover up a lot of the area in here. I'm going to grab a bit of water on my brush. Now these kind of dip down and then they tend to come back up. And the idea here is that the branch is heavy, right? The more foliage it has, the more branch it has, the more it dips because of gravity. However, when we get towards the end of the branches, they spike up a little bit because that area is thin. It doesn't have the weight of the rest of the branch. There we go. You can see that I'm also working very hard to make these all quite unique. That said, let's get you a little bit closer to the canvas. So here we have a lot of that billowing effect. We're overlapping the trees that we just rendered. We're overlapping a lot of the backing mountain as well. The branches will get a bit larger as we move towards the bottom, just because they'll be more developed, they'll have more time to grow. But the top has these beautiful little sparse areas, which I will build out over time. You can see I'm going back to a couple of them right now, and the idea there is we apply our pigment, we see how we like it, and if we want more of it, we can go back and we can add more. If we don't, then we don't. But we give ourselves that time to see how we feel and just make sure we're making the right call. There we go. I really like how this is turning out. It's coming together quickly, which isn't a bad thing. Sometimes, you always hear about musicians and the songs you love. For me, I think one of them was Skyfall by Adele. And the story behind that is that it came together in, I think, like an hour or something incredible like that. Sometimes sometimes that inspiration flows. Sometimes you get something special, quickly, out of passion. And I think that's this. We can also switch on over to our liner brush. And create little protrusions, expansions, with a level of intentionality which we weren't really able to incorporate when working with a larger brush. This isn't necessary, but it's also not bad. So, once we have this applied, once we're happy with it, we let it dry, and then we'll come back in to make it three-dimensional. So we're back. Our applications are nice and dry, and I think it's well balanced. If we want later, we can expand upon it, but for now, I think it's in a good place. With that, we're going to render what is going to be the brightest green, the more saturated green we've made. Here we have the previous one, and we are just expanding on that in the same way we did last time by incorporating slightly more titanium white, a little bit more green gold, less Mars black. So here you can see that we have the option to go something significantly more saturated. Still not doing that because we are going to continue to get more saturated as we move closer and closer into the foreground. So we're just taking steps, creating a large mixture here because we have a lot of surface area to cover. And as you can see, the larger flat-headed brush is still the ideal brush for the situation. Now, what we have is going to be different on the canvas because we're mixing over a very dark pigment, but I think this will be great. So, we have two ways of going about this. One, we can go in with this brush, tap it towards the tops in the same way we just did with the larger brush for the shadows. We can work it back in towards the rest of the tree, as you can see. And I'm doing that for portions. I'm not doing that for all of it, but I'm doing it for some of the more dominant, easily discernible, easily traceable portions of our tree, branches. And this is giving us a somewhat randomized, less controlled application, which, you know, here and there is nice. Trying to keep the camera a bit farther back for this application, just because it's more about what it looks like holistically than the actual tap of the brush. And realistically, our branches are probably going to look a little bit different, even if you're using the traceable. We're all going to make artistic liberties, and that's okay. I'm going to get some extra water, grab that pigment, and of course the branches towards the outskirts, like what we currently have here, are going to get the majority of those highlights. And will dissipate as we move towards the right. Photo areas in behind, which are catching light. Using the corner of the brush for these. But we are going to have little bits of light throughout there. Now we'll get closer and use a more fine brush. So, you guessed it, we're back to the liner. And we can line the tops of a lot of these. I'm going in with a tap for the most part. And I can do it even over the previously highlighted areas because, again, we used water. They are thin to a point, and therefore additional applications over them will thicken it, and it'll create a gradient, a change in value. And that will make it more unique and interesting than if we just had that singular application of the line with the larger flat-headed brush. Again, variance is really the key through a lot of this. And I'm just jumping around, looking for tops of branches which are yet to be built out with highlight. A lot of branches. Some of them will cast shadows on others, so they won't have the same level of highlight, but they might have a little bit. And again, adding this to the tops of branches in between your trees. We are going to add some hue to the actual vertical portions of our trees as well. We're just not quite there yet. So far so good. Let's move down. You can see that I'm really trying to get these horizontal lines to be a bit more speckled to connect them once in a while. Here you can see these branches really crisscross at this point. That's a big goal. There we go. And we'll bring that down. Here, now if you incorporate too much of those highlights, you feel like you lose the shadows in between, you can always go back with the previous pigment and re-interject those breaking points. It's the beauty of acrylics. It's so malleable. You can really just go back and forth until you get exactly what you want. And I find that doing this here and there can make a really big difference. Especially in the larger applications. You can just split them in half and immediately you have twice the detail. It also lets you deal with repetition easily. There we go. Look at that. So much detail, so quickly, and a lot of it was done by working somewhat reductively. Okay, now from here, we're going to grab our burnt sienna, which is something we haven't really done much of. We'll grab our titanium white, we'll grab our Mars black, we'll render something fairly dark, but an earthy, warm hue, just like that. And yet again, we're back to the liner brush. Now with this, I'm going to head in and I'm going to find the openings in our tree, the areas that essentially are facing the light, which is coming this way. And I'm just doing these little taps along the edges that receive light. And then I'll work them back through additional taps. But the idea is we're just interjecting a small amount of another hue into our space. We can even run this down portions of our branches, but I'll get you a lot closer because I know it's quite far away and this is rather subtle. It's meant to be subtle, but let's get you closer. So here we go. More of that pigment. We have an opening in our tree here. We have an opening in our tree here, here. These are areas that you can see that some of them I've already done in that last clip. But here we'll take a couple movements back with our taps. We'll work down our branches. And what's really important through this is that you don't leave a little bit of that darker value touching the sky and then do the brown. You need to do the brown, and if that means overlapping portions of the sky, that's okay. If that means making the branch a little bit larger, that's okay. Here we can also do little splashes of it inside as if there are openings in the tree which are illuminating various portions of the branches. And we'll have some more fun with that down here. We can grab extra titanium white, extra burnt sienna, make something even brighter, build on those initial applications. And you can tell that it's not prominent. It's not a dramatically bright hue or saturated one, but it's just enough to start making this interesting. And importantly, this will be a good bridge between the hues that we have in the ground that we'll incorporate very soon. So we're starting to practice with a color we'll need to get quite familiar with. Okay, so stepping back, I think that we have just the right amount of detail in there for now, and the area that we're connecting it to is this pathway through here, which I'm going to do before I do the foliage on the left or the right, or the other tree for that matter, because we're going to layer a lot of the bushes and foliage on top of it. So this is essentially the background of the foreground. For it, we're going to go in with an abundance of our burnt sienna, titanium white, Mars black, because we don't want it to be too saturated. A little bit more. In fact, we're working towards a bit more of a grayish brown. Titanium white. This actually be great for the rocks. We'll have quite a few sun-kissed rocks through it. And you know what? I think we could actually use a little bit of extra warmth in this. So I'm going to grab another tube of paint. Said yellow, as you can see here, is a Naples yellow, and it's a bit more muted. It's a bit on the warm side, and I personally love it on sunny days. So we have a lot of pigment right here. We're going to start layering that into the background. We'll overlap our foliage on both the left and the right hand side. We'll have this work up into a lot of the rocks, just like so. Have it move down, and then as you get to here, we actually have areas of shadow. So I'm going to do a couple little taps just to create openings, but we're now going to grab some Mars black, work that into our pigment. The Mars black is going to mix with the titanium white and the Naples yellow and very much desaturate it. So to keep that brownish, earthy hue, we're going to re-interject some burnt sienna, like so. We're mixing these right beside each other so we know what they'll look like beside each other on the canvas. And I think this is perfect. I like that a lot. We'll have this kind of come down, work its way around. A lot of that sandy color. We'll do soft blends around the edges for the most part. And then we can also interject additional shadow up here because we'll have that from some of the foliage. And that also has its own little blend on the edge. There we go. Trying to create inconsistencies. And we'll also do a couple little taps as we emerge from these shadows. We want these to get softer and softer, and it'll happen naturally as we run out of paint on our brush. We'll even do a little bit back here. We might not need this, we might cover it up, but we have it just in case. And I'm also going to do that on the other side. We can't really see this in the reference photo, but it makes sense that the foliage on both sides would cast a shadow. So again, we're just giving ourselves option. And then I can go back in with that same pigment that we used for the middle, because at this point it's essentially dry through these areas, so I'm just going to go in with more so I can get that slightly softer look. And if it gets a little bit muddy, that's actually okay. We're working on ground. And if we have these little unique hues and interesting speckles, that's to our benefit. So you can see I'm actually taking some of those lighter pigments and moving them out, some of the darker pigments, moving them in. There we are. That said, we're far from over in this space. We're putting that brush down. We're picking up our trusty little fan brush. We'll grab some of that highlight, and I'll just tap some of these highlights over the shadows. Like so. This is going to look like we have small little protrusions in the sand that pop up and catch extra light. There we go. We don't want too many of them through here, but we can have a couple. We want them to be sparse. Oh, I love that. The fan brush just does so much. It really does. Okay. Let's get a little closer. Now we're going to grab some extra titanium white, extra Naples yellow, mix that into our previous highlight, render a brand new, even brighter highlight. Just like that. We can then use it sporadically throughout here, because the sand's all not going to be the same hue or color. We are going to have brighter spots, especially out towards this opening. That's where it's going to be the brightest. And then it'll slowly dissipate as we get farther back, just because we have more foliage and whatnot creating shadow through there. We can then take our fan brush, as we just used, and do little taps along the edges and throughout. This is just going to give us a more unique, speckled, textured, realistic finish and transition. There we go. Starting to come together, right? Now, let's go for something a hint darker again. And we're looking for variation at this point. Perfect. See, it's quite close to what we had before, but it's a little bit more gray. Pick that up with a fan brush. Go in and create some additional separation. Not a lot, but every little bit helps. Softening the shadows in the distance, just a little bit. This is such an easy way of creating a highly textured, detailed, sandy finish, complete with lots of light. We can also, for the shadow, use our liner brush to further define some of our spots. You can see I'm going in with a bit of a tap, a bit of a drag. It's a combination of application, styles, and effects. And I'm going to have this work its way up here, create almost a hill-like effect. Using water so I can also do a bit of a nice easy blend. There we go. And we'll bring that all together. Now when we look at it as a whole, admittedly, while I think this area looks great up close, it looks a little bit awkward because we have negative space on either sides, though I don't think that's anything to worry about. I think once we have our greenery, it's all going to fit, though we do need some rocks in it, and these are going to be very much akin to the pigments we just had, so I'm actually going to mix with both of them, at least what's left. I'm going to create a warmer, earthy gray, just like so. We're going to switch on over to the smaller flat-headed brush because it can pick up a lot of paint, render sharp edges, which is very important for what we are currently doing. And then I will just sketch on lots of little rocks. There are plenty in the traceable in this area. I'm not going to follow the previous idea to a T, but that's okay. I'm going to add them in a bit more intuitively. And you can see that there isn't a dramatic variance in the values between what we've previously established in these, though we are going to get that more dramatic look now when we take a lot more titanium white, work that in, and we're going to make something that's quite a bit brighter than even what we use for the brightest of sand. We don't want it to be a pure titanium white, but we want it to be pretty bright. Grab that pigment, build up our rocks. Just like so. We have a lot of these guys. We even do little taps for additional tiny stones. You can see how all of these different subjects, details, and textures amalgamate into something that looks the way we want it to. It's about the build-up. Let's get a bit closer. Now, from here, yet again, we're going to double down on the brighter, warmer hues, though I'm going to apply them not with the smaller flat-headed brush that was great for blocking in our rocks. However, I am now going to transition into the liner brush, where we will put those finer details in and do what we do best with this brush, which is render something sharp, intentional, there we go. You can see I'm applying it to the tops of the rocks, occasionally combining them, and I'm doing this even in the shadow areas. As the pigment starts to run out, on the brush. I don't do so initially, but we do get there. And this is a unique touch. You don't need to do it, but I do like the extra variance within the sand. I think that a collection of rocks like this really makes sense within this setting. You can see it in the reference photo, but it depends on how detailed you want to make it. I think paths like this are important in paintings. I really want to draw the viewer in, because now we look at this and I think a lot of us would feel enticed to walk down the path, right? The more realistic we can make the path, even if it makes it slightly inconvenient to walk the path, I think the better. There we go. Let's grab some of our less bright hue value and work that back into this area. Just build out some of the rocks in ways that we hadn't before. Now that we have those brighter ones, these darker ones are a bit more unique. We have a better idea of what we want to do with them, how many we want, and I like that a lot. Maybe we add more later, but I think for the most part, we've blocked in what we want. Okay, very good. I think it's time, just about anyway, after I add a slight highlight to these, the very watery mixture. You can tell that it's not as bright as what we had here because we let the pigment run out. But now that we have these incorporated, lots of little taps as well, we can move on to our next subject. Alright, now the next step is arguably one of the most fun, and that is blocking in the remainder of the canvas. So, we have a lot of Mars Black. We have a lot of our green. We have a little bit of titanium white, not much, but we're doing a big mix here because we have a lot of surface area. We're leaving it fairly saturated with the green, and as you're about to see, we are about to jump in and have fun. So, I'm going to start, for the most part, while I have the most wet, fresh pigment towards the actual pathway, and I'll do little taps that overlap the path, just briefly, not dramatically. We don't have it with large indentations at all. It's just little hints that cover and protrude out. There we go. And then as you move towards the right hand side, we get into the corner, we're going to add some extra Mars Black. We're going to make it even darker. That way we have a vignette effect. The eye does innately go to the brightest point of any picture or painting, typically. So by making the edges, the corners, a little bit more Mars Black heavy, we can subtly do so. We want a nice thick application. Now we're going to head on over to the other side. Again, I'll use that darker pigment for the corner. I'll work that so we have a bit of space between our path and it, and then I'll go up to the brighter portion of that mix. And much like the other side, I am going to start with this pigment by overlapping little bits of our pathway. We'll just bring that all the way back there. I love this. Always such a fun part of a painting. Covering up the remainder of that unfinished white. Being fairly careful towards the top that I don't expand this too dramatically. We can expand it later should we want to, but right now I'm just looking for this almost tapped dance of texture. Then I'll go back over a number of the areas, fill them in to a greater degree. But we make this brighter, we make it loose, we make it playful. We have little sharp indentations which protrude. Intentionality is important. There we go. And you can see I actually did cover just about all of the shadow on the left and right hand side. That's okay. We incorporated it just in case we wanted it, and I didn't personally end up feeling like we needed it, but perhaps you will, and if so, the technique, the demonstration is there. Now I'm just going to double up on some of these applications, make them a bit more thick. Then we can let it dry, and then we can build. So from here, once we have all of our paint applied and dried, we're going to go in with an even darker mixture. So we're doubling down on Mars Black. We still have a bit of our green gold, and we don't really need to interject any titanium white because the green gold carries quite a bit of brightness in itself. Then we're not going to apply it with a large flathead brush. We're going to switch over to our fan brush. I want a myriad of tiny markings, different points of detail that could look like shadows amongst the soon-to-be highlighted sections of foliage along the edge of our path here. And with these, I'm only going in with about a third of the brush. I'm rotating frequently, but I'm rotating in the air and not on the actual canvas. If we rotate on the canvas, we get a lot of swirls and markings, things that aren't so sharp in the way that we want them to be. Though we rotate in the air so that each marking doesn't look the same, so that we don't end up with a bunch of lines, right? The more randomized this can look, the better it'll be. And you'll also notice that I'm going over some of these areas a couple of times. It really depends on how much of that texture you want later on. How dark you want the piece to be, how bright and airy you want the piece to be. It's also dependent on how much detail you have in this midsection. If you have a lot of detail in the midsection, you probably want a lot of detail in these edges, just so it feels cohesive. If there's not a lot in the middle, you probably don't want a lot here. Let's get a bit closer for that side. Now, I know it can be a little difficult to see, just based off of the reflection, but also we're not going in with a marking that's dramatically darker, right? Especially around the edges. We talked about interjecting that vignette effect earlier. So these markings will progressively get lost in the edges, in those bottom portions. They'll be a bit more prevalent here towards the top. And so we want to be extra attentive in these spaces. I'm actually starting here because it's when I have the most sharp pigment on my brush. My bristles are the least condensed that they'll be. So this is a great place to begin over on this side. Then we slowly work our way down towards the right, the foreground. Not applying much pressure with the brush because if we do, we'll expand our bristles and that'll create markings rather than taps. I'm looking for something very finite and intentional here, despite the randomized application style. And it's really the combination of the two that will find something nice and realistic. Also, try to ensure that you're not picking up too much paint at any given time on your brush, because that too will condense your bristles. We're not looking to do that with the fan brush right now. We actually will be fairly soon, but right now we want as small a marking as we can get, and if we want to build on them, simply go over them multiple times with the same soft tapped application style. Might jump over to the other side once it dries a little bit, bounce around, take those steps back, make sure that it's full and complete in all of the ways that you want it to be. And then once this is dry, we can have some fun jumping into our highlights, or at least the base of our highlights. We're going to layer it up step by step, build some mid values, and pretty soon we'll have a sun-soaked pathway. Now, stepping back, there's not a lot of texture, but you can see a bit of it. That's exactly what we want, something subtle. And from there, we're going to work on our mid values. So I'm grabbing a lot of green gold, a little bit of our Mars black, titanium white. We're grabbing both of which, and I want this to be darker than the highlights, brighter than what we just mixed, and I want it to have a lot of room to continue to get brighter. So here we have a nice foresty, earthy green. We spread it quite wide on our palette, and I'm going in with a dry, clean fan brush. This technique is going to continue through here. We can augment the fan brush, and we likely will in a little bit, but right now I'm just going to go in with the same tapping effect and motion. We are still rotating the brush here and there, but not in too dramatic of a way. And we'll just start building that up. We want to leave openings so that the shadow can show through. That's going to give us the actual depth in the painting. There we go. And you can kind of craft different bushes by creating clusters, leaving intentional openings that are larger, and kind of doubling down on potential pattern. It's also worth noting that I started in the background and now I'm moving to the foreground. As I get towards the front here, because we're going to have a tree right here, I'm going to let this dramatically dissipate and run out as we get into the area here that will be inevitably covered in shadow. So brighter to darker, and I'm just doing that not by changing my mix, by letting the pigment run out. Now, we need to make that a lot brighter, but before we do, we're going to let it dry, and in the meantime, we're going to head over here. Now, as we venture over onto the right-hand side of the canvas, I'm going to begin these applications on the left-hand side of the subject. Because the light's coming in this way, we're going to illuminate this side to a greater degree. We're going to have this kind of climbing, protruding, upwards. We'll let this dissipate as you move towards the right-hand side of the subject itself. You can see that I'm going over the same areas a couple of times to build a more bright foundation, especially in the highlighted portions. Just like so. And then we can keep the darker spots towards the right and the bottom a bit more sparse. Though I do want some extra taps and applications through there. It's also worth noting a lot of the taps that I want to be implying height, I'm doing vertically, and then I round different bushes by going diagonally and then horizontally. There we go. Looking good. Now again, we're going to get into the shadows. I'm going to let this dissipate. It's not going to be as bright. Pressing a little bit harder with the brush because I do want some level of the bristles coming together. Because as we get closer to us, these leaves, this foliage will get larger. I think we'll go back in. Do a bit more through here. Might even double down on some of the markings we made towards the back. Very good. And then again, once we have almost nothing left on the brush, making those larger presses into this area, but there are greater openings as a whole as well. Alright, and now that things are dry, we're going to take that same mix, we're going to interject additional titanium white, brighten it up, and as you can see, it's not the brightest pigment that we've used thus far. We can see a slightly brighter green. That's okay. We are still building. This isn't our final green, but it is definitely the next step. Still blending with the larger flathead because it is the most efficient. I'm going back to the fan brush, and yet again, this is clean, it's dry, we don't have any pigment on the edges, and we want it dry still because we still want to make those very sharp intentional markings towards the back. This will change soon, but for now, we're going to go in with all of these great little taps. And at this point, our hues are probably going to begin to visually mesh a little bit with the trees that we have in behind. Not a bad thing. I'm applying a lot of the highlight to this edge because that's the way light's coming down, to the tops. And then I'm letting there be less as I get towards this lip, which would bend inwards and down, right? Because it's on the opposite side of the light. Then as we get closer, I press a little bit harder with my brush. We make those bigger markings, like so, and we can even stagger it from the smaller to the larger. Now we're going to have a bit of a shadow, which we can see through here. So I'm going to look at this shadow, I'm going to imagine that it's continued, and we're going to respect that. And we'll also let it dissipate as we get towards this edge. Just like so. Now yet again, we're jumping to that right hand side. We're applying highlight to the edges which are receiving the most light. And interestingly, this bottom portion isn't always going to be that bright because we're going to have parts of the top here creating shadows on that bottom portion. So I'm going to be a bit more dramatic with my applications towards the top than towards the side with this particular mixture. So while we are applying it with the same taps as before, we are slightly changing how much we apply to each area and where we allocate light and these taps. We still want it to lessen as we get towards the edge because there will be less light, there will be more shadows. That much is intuitive. We're not going to do too much through here because we have this shadow which is definitely going to make its way through. You can see this little protrusion, but like perhaps that could also just be a larger shadow. They're going to have some little areas that stick out, catch light because there are openings in this. We're not going to do much with that, and we are going to do larger taps, just like so. And then we'll take a couple of steps back and make sure we like the general progression, because that's really what's most important, that it's all coming together. We're making something cohesive, we're carrying that larger feeling from the piece. So, stepping back, quite happy with the progression. We have let it dry, and now we are doubling down on that brightness. Here we have the previous brightest point in our piece, and with this grand amount of titanium white, we are yet again increasing that. At this point, I don't think I'm going to use any Mars Black. I don't think we need to desaturate this pigment. And it's also worth noting that the pigment you're looking at currently on the palette isn't going to be exactly what we have on the canvas, because acrylics are innately semi-transparent, and the darker hues, values that we see on the canvas will show through that which we are about to apply. With that, I am going to grab some of this with my clean, dry fan brush. We're going to apply it in the background first, when we can render the sharpest, most intentional markings. We're applying it towards that edge as we talked about, because that is going to give us the most light wrapping around it. Still just using about a third of my brush for any of these markings, and I am trying, not always succeeding, but I'm always trying to work over previous highlights. We're at the point where we've used this technique quite a bit. We're familiar with our fan brush, and we have a bit of confidence with our applications. So we'll just continue building this, adding to the light, and letting that progressively lessen. We'll grab more, head on over to the other side. Going to have some heavily protruding pieces, so that it isn't always just wrapping back this way. There are going to be ones that find their way out of the bunch. Looks a little bit uneven, but not in a bad way. In a sporadic, organic way. There's a big difference. Now, I don't want to do too much of this highlight over in this area because of the shadows, but we will give it a couple of applications. We'll probably take a second to take a step back right after this application, but I can tell in the reference photo there aren't a lot of shadows, so that means there aren't a lot of openings, at least in this section. So we can go over it multiple times, we can build up that base of highlight, and it can kind of visually amalgamate to something that's a bit more visually prominent. We also, again, have some openings in the trees that are going to be casting the shadows, so we're creating those implied openings through little patches of highlight here and there. And then as I run out of paint, I can do just a little bit more sporadic pieces. There we go. Honestly, I think this is turning out pretty great. Might soften some of the shadows through here though. Okay, with that, let's grab a little bit of water, maybe a tea, something to ensure we're staying healthy and hydrated through the painting process. It's so easy to kind of just get lost in it and forget that we need to take care of ourselves. So with that, we can come back with fresh eyes, see what we want to do with the highlights, and I'll see you in just a second. Alright, now from here we're going to double down on our highlight. That means exceedingly greater amount of titanium white. And the titanium white is great because not only is it brightening it, but it's also desaturating it minorly. And here we have by far the most prominent pigment. We are going back to that same brush. I know it's a lot of similar choices and applications, but what's great about that is we have all of these practice opportunities, right? We get to really familiarize ourselves with the subjects, with our tools, with our pigments, and then as we build into the more prominent layers, the ones that we apply with the greatest of highlight, we get them just right. So we want to let this dissipate as we move towards the shadows, the foreground, just like so. We're going to head over to this side. This is the most important area. This is kind of pointing us towards the center of the painting. Starting there, moving back, and of course, I will get you a little bit closer just so you can see the detail work. And here, quite a bit closer, we can see how my markings are protruding diagonally towards the path and the center of the painting. We have a lot of these rounded, both vertical but also horizontal markings in the darker pigments. So we have the structure for a lot of it, but these are the ones that stick out, these are the ones that catch light, these are the ones that create a much more early noticeable rendering. Still going to have small pieces which stick out in the darker portions, like so, but not too many. And because this is so dramatic in terms of its value in relation to everything else, we're going to apply some, we're going to take a step back, we're going to look at it. We're going to apply some, we're going to take a step back, we're going to look at it. We're going to repeat that process just to make sure that we're on track, as this is something we really do want to be on track with. Okay, I like that. Pops well. Let's take that slightly more distant look. Now, stepping back, I think we finally found the correct amount of highlight for our greens, and we can be a bit more intentional with our marks from here. So I've switched over to the liner brush. Typically I don't like to mix with this just because we don't have a lot of actual surface area on the bristles to work with. However, we don't need a lot of pigment, and this is just going to be for crafting the pieces which protrude, catch light in formative ways that dramatically impact our composition, bring our eye where we want it to. So for me, that's along this edge to a point. You can see how these areas are now quite a bit brighter, sun-soaked. We are creating additional direction. The fan brush was great for that wider application and initiating a randomization which we wouldn't innately be able to accomplish just because the eye and the mind work to a point subconsciously in patterns that through a singular tapping motion like this we wouldn't be able to avoid with real efficiency. So here we have that somewhat randomized base, what's organic and natural, and now we can mold it intentionally, get what we want. So here along the edges. Going to make sure that the darker darks don't always find the edge. We want these little pieces that move over, drape, just like so. We can incorporate little taps throughout, hints of light, not dramatic, but little bits. And then we'll also head on over to the other side, create those as well. And we're not going to have as much light on this side because the light's going to wrap around. This will create a shadow on itself. However, there'll be little bits. They'll be a bit more subtle, and as long as I keep my brush damp through this, our applications will be semi-transparent. So they won't be as bright or dominant as what we see in a lot of the highlights, despite the fact that we're using the same mixed pigment and brush. And again, our markings can get larger the closer we get to us. Just like so. I'm going to do a couple random little taps because again we'll have openings on this side as well. You can see I'm painting from a bit of a distance. I'm not holding the brush up close, holding it farther away, that way I can get that farther look. And now, we have all of these slightly protruding pieces to the sides, and it makes sense that they would cast shadows. We pre-initiated that and then covered up a lot of it. We're going to re-initiate it, this time with intent. So we're a bit closer, and we're going to remix the shadow hue that we had in the ground. And we are using our Naples yellow, a bit of burnt sienna to make it nice and warm. Titanium white is to thicken and desaturate. Mars black to darken and desaturate. We have quite a number of these hues spread about in this area, and I did intentionally keep them, that way we can revisit them again. But I think the one we're actually looking for is right here. So, looking at this and this, I can tell that the values are similar. However, this is just a little bit too desaturated. So we're going to bring in some additional saturation with that burnt sienna. And we'll do a bit of a greater mix just so we have a good amount of pigment to pull from. I think that looks great. Now for the actual application process, we are working with our liner brush because this does need to be intentional. And we'll do a little test to make sure that this is the right pigment. Going over the previous shadows, I think it looks great. So let's say this protrudes. That means it's going to create a shadow right through here. Right? It's casting down that light in such a way. So that looks natural. Now this one, again, just like so. It's also worth noting that if you kind of lost where all of this is supposed to be, again, you can find the traceable up over on Patreon, and that way you don't have to worry about the drawing process and continuously refiguring out where everything goes. If you're fairly new to the channel, up there you can get access to the traceables for all of these. Again, this one you can get an ad-free version of. All the lessons being posted from here on out will actually have an ad-free version up over on Patreon, so you don't have to worry about that. But you can also get images of all of the material lists, so you know that you're working with the exact same paints. And you get access to the exclusive Facebook group where everybody posts their renditions of these pieces. You can ask the community for advice and get a lot of inspiration from other people who are working on similar works. I know that I myself find myself frequently inspired by the community and what's being done up there. You can also get access to over 100 bonus lessons, some of which over big 24 by 36 inch canvases. So if you enjoy this but you want to work bigger, there's option for that. there's a lot of fun stuff up there. You can also subscribe at the highest tier, and there I will actually paint. I will paint one of your images. We'll hop on a call. You'll tell me about what you want a lesson on, at which point we can make that happen. It has to be a landscape, because that's what we do here. But I can teach you how to paint a scene from maybe one of your trips or a moment that's special to you. A lot of great stuff up there. And I also want to say a big thank you to everybody who is already up over on Patreon and making lessons like this happen. I couldn't do it without you. And I mean that. Genuinely, truly could not make these videos if it wasn't for your support. So thank you for making this all happen. Here I'm creating a little bit of a shadow for the rocks, just to double down on some of the details and textures through here. It's a little bit darker, but not by a lot. I like that. It's very similar to what we have in the shadows as a whole. Okay, beautiful. Let's just add in slightly more of that playful movement. And then take another step back. All right, now stepping back, I think we're in a great place. We still need to interject a number of little branches and, perhaps the trunks of these trees. However, for now, we're going to take a bit of a break from that just to not overcomplicate it in the moment. We're going to work on the tree to the left-hand side. This is going to frame the painting. It's going to give us a nice vignette, and it's going to balance the trees that we have right there. Now for this, we're working with a much darker green mixture, so an abundance still of green gold, but also a lot of Mars black. We have a hint of titanium white. This will thicken it. This will let the green gold show through the mix to a slightly greater degree. And we're working on branches very much akin to that which we have here. So we could go in with the larger flat-headed brush, just like you can see me doing so. And I like this. I think it works well. We've done it before. We can use it again. However, we can also switch to the smaller flat-headed brush should we feel we want additional detail. And I think that's inevitable. These branches are closer to us than that which we've previously worked on, and as we know, the closer we get to a subject, the more detail of it we can incorporate, because the more that will be visually seen, noticed. So, I'm going to take a little bit of a break visually. There, we're going to jump down a bit. We'll continue, said, to jump down. And we had a talk earlier in the lesson about not covering up, or rather not fearing covering up portions that we love, because often that's necessary for the layering process and will render a much better painting as a whole should we be okay with doing said layering. However, I do want to be quite careful through this section of not covering up too much of the backing, because this is really what's giving us the majority of our depth. So I'm going to make these branches and these sections intentionally a little bit more sparse than they might be in the reference photo or even in real life, though in real life is questionable because you will have some trees which are significantly more developed, they have aged to a greater degree, they're healthier. There are so many different factors that dramatically impact the shape and size of trees. So we are just applying this one right through here. I love this area. I don't want to work through it in any dramatic way. So we are going to be hyper cognizant of our applications through this section. Might even take a little bit of a visual break again. resume lower, as you can see. And then this is something that will also overlap a lot of the greenery that we have here in the foreground. This will instigate significantly more depth. And what's great about this application is we're working on the right-hand side of the tree. The light is coming down from the left-hand side, so the vast majority of this is in shadow. And we need that compositionally, because if this was all rendered with a grand highlight, much like what we have over there, we'd be pulling our eye far towards the left-hand side in a way that we don't really want. It's also just a lot easier right now, right? When you don't have to build up this litany of layers. We can also make our mix slightly darker as we get towards the bottom for a couple of reasons. One, the tree is casting shadows on itself, and therefore the shadows will be dominant. We'll have less of that light working its way around, kind of bending through the subject. There we go. Now we can see that sweeping vignette effect. Let's get you a bit closer as we switch brushes and manage details in a very intentional way. So as we get closer, I am switching to the smaller flat-headed brush. We'll make sure it's nice and damp to condense those bristles, keep things as sharp as possible. And then I'm going to find all of those little protruding ends and expand upon them. It doesn't necessarily need to be with a drag, it can just be with a tap of this brush, because we do have just such a fine, sharp point, and it is elongated, so it in itself will do quite the job. Also, when we go for the stroke, typically we have to apply some level of additional pressure. That will expand the bristles, it will make for a larger marking, and that really isn't what we are looking for right now. So, we're going in, we're being careful. Also, while we're talking about being careful, be careful to not grab too much water. We want some because it will aid the process. But if we add too much, it will essentially go on as water in a larger marking. So it's one of those things where it can thin the application, make it extremely precise, or it can expand it if we do too much. So we're looking for the middle ground. You can see I'm expanding these. With trees, as a general rule, I like to do less initially. That way I have more freedom in the expansion. It's a lot easier to add foliage than it is to take it away. It is acrylics and it is friendly and you can always rework things, but it's just easier typically to work in a way that allows for expansion rather than reduction. A lot of care and detail in these. We put a lot of time into the rest of the painting, so we don't want to get too excited about the idea of finishing and then get a little too loose with it. We want to still work intentionally, take our time, and do it right. And that's really what we're doing right now. Also, a friendly reminder that the ends of branches have a lot less weight than the primary body, so there will be a bit of an expansion upwards. It'll rise almost like a bell shape, and so will the surrounding protrusions. It's a great little easy detail. Makes your trees seem nice and airy, also have a variety of weights to them, which is pretty beneficial for rendering realism. See, we're just working our way down. Our markings can get a bit larger as we get towards the bottom because these branches are significantly more developed. But I'm still being careful to keep a lot of this depth showing through, using a good amount of openings. And these expansions, you could go in with a slightly lighter mix than that which you did for the primary body, because these protruding pieces will get a bit more light moving through them. Not a dramatic amount, but certainly more. And visually playing into that can be beneficial. Also make sure that as you move over this with this watery mixture that you get nice opaque markings. It's easy to have them semi-transparent, but if you have them semi-transparent, you lose a lot of that visual weight that this area can carry. So from there, we'll take that step back. I really like the progression of the tree. I like the movements. I like how we're kind of using this as leading lines to push in towards that center. We've still maintained a good amount of that background, and I think that we're in a really solid spot. That said, as noted before, we do want some smaller branches through there. I'm going to make a quite dark, grayish, earthy brown, certainly darker than that which we used in the shadows for the ground, but with the same palette for the most part. We might void the Naples yellow, but we have a lot of that burnt sienna, and you know what, we'll do a little bit of that Naples yellow. Mix up a good amount of it, still using hints of titanium white. And for these, we're going to apply them with our liner brush. We'll make sure it's nice and wet, and then we can just drop in some subtle branches which will go over portions of the greenery but also behind other portions. The goal here is just to render something that looks nice and randomized, natural. I don't have a lot of intended structure with it, aside from the fact that we should still keep leading lines in mind. I know we talk a lot about that, but this is the end of the painting. This is where we bring it all together, and that's something that we need to make sure is correct. That way we have a larger, proper flow through a lot of it. So, bunch of minute markings. We can even create an opening in the tree, kind of continue some of these should we want to. I think that's a good look. We'll also do a couple little branches towards the bottom. Maybe connect little pieces of foliage that we've previously established, or have protruding in unique ways. And then we're going to switch over to almost a bit of a green highlight. Sap green, or rather green gold, Mars black, titanium white, more green gold. It's not bright, it's not dark, it's very middle ground, but I'm going to go in with a pretty damp brush, and I'll just add slight highlights to the tops of the larger branches over here on the left hand side. This is going to be the light coming down, it's catching the tops in a non-dramatic fashion. And because we're applying it with a lot of water and over a very dark area, it itself is going to be a lot darker, which is a good thing. We don't want this to be prominent. We don't want this to be dramatic. This is just a subtle addition to something that was previously, for the most part, silhouetted. So we're just interjecting a bit of depth. As this dries, it'll be less bright, but an important step nonetheless. You know, typically towards the end of these lessons I like to give a little keyword, something you can type in the comments that notes that you are part of, on average, the 13% who makes it to the end of these lessons. So today, I think our word will be vast. I think it's a vast landscape here. So you can just type that word if you want to, or you can incorporate it in a comment. Perhaps tell me about a vast landscape you've been to, seen, or perhaps it's on your bucket list. You can comment on this scene or whatever you'd like. But if you put that in the comments, I know that you made it to here, as well as everybody else who did as well. It's always kind of fun to see who does routinely. I do notice, I do take note. It's always fun. But with that, we are just tidying up some of these branches. Adding in the line work down here is also going to be quite nice, because we have a lot of sporadic tapping, and incorporating that line work is going to be a beautiful visual change. Just like so. Something else we can do at this point, should we want to, is mix more of our greens that are a little bit brighter, more green gold heavy. And we can expand the tops of these should we want to. We don't have to, but now that we know what the rest of the painting looks like, we have a bit more freedom to expand. It's up to you. There's no right or wrong. You can have a more developed tree or a less developed tree, but I know that I like when these get a little wispy towards the ends. They don't have a full body in the way that they did. I know you're quite far away and we're working with real details, but at this point we're really just solidifying, doing more of that which we've previously done before, doubling down on the areas that we love, making minor fixes in the areas that we don't. So it's not about the details right now. It's really about the whole and using details to finalize grand ideas, movements, palettes, textures, and the works. This really has me daydreaming about some summer trips, some longer hikes, taking some reference photos, which of course would be shared up over on Patreon. But this is fun. This is a lot of fun. I hope that you find it just as fulfilling. I hope you feel like you've learned something. I hope you are excited to paint. In general, it's a beautiful medium. It's a beautiful pastime. And I love that we can share this together. So, I'll see you soon with a new lesson. Admittedly, while I've been working on this one, I started 2 others. So it's that thing again of, there's a little bit of a break with the lessons, but now we'll be back with quite a few. We have a Northern Lights painting coming up with some beautiful mountains, and I think also this light coming through a fairly almost mythical, surreal tree. I also want to do another sunset on the beach, the ocean. That's been calling lately. So we've got a lot on the horizon. But again, hope you had a wonderful time. Hope you're excited for the future. I'll see you soon with a new lesson, and again, if you want the traceable, ad-free version, reference photos, all of that good stuff, it's up on Patreon. If you want to work with the same brushes that I'm using, you can find those in the video description. It's a 5-piece brush set, completely cruelty-free. Always very proud of that. But it's one of those things where you pick it up and you essentially have the correct brushes for all of the acrylic lessons you see here on the channel. So again, wishing you the best. I'll see you soon. And above all, as always, stay creative.